Shalom and welcome to Yeshiva B'nai Noach. I'm Tom O'Vern as we continue with our beginning biblical Hebrew course. This is chapter 4 from the first Hebrew primer, the third edition. And as I mentioned before, I would ask that you purchase the book. There are the links in the first segment and in this one as well that give you links to Amazon's edition of First Hebrew Primer. You can check out other places to purchase it, either new or used. But this is the textbook that we'll be using in this class. And this chapter deals with nouns and verbs, masculine, the masculine nouns and masculine verbs. Let's begin with our oral review. And as always, I'll just ask you to stop the video as often as you need to. I'll read across the lines, but I would recommend that you stop before I begin, and then, if need be, stop after I'm done and try again until you can comfortably pronounce each and every word. So let's begin. Line 1. Avraham. Acharon. David. Yosef. Leah. Moshe. Yitzchak. Line 2. Israel. Moab. Mitzrayim. Paro. Ruth. Naomi. Sarah. Line 3. Shalom. Bayit. Ben. Ish. Davar. Hu. Zachar. Na'ar. Line 4. Malach. Melech. Bat. Amad. Shama. Shamar. Behema. Na'ara. Line 5. Isha. Mishpacha. Derek. Eretz. Betuch. Ruach. Lifnei. Line 6. Lechem. Zon. Gebulcha. Amdu. Laila. Malchu. Baderek. Line 7. Ha'av. Habain. Habat. Hadavar. Hamelech. Haish. Hana'ar. Line 8. Batim. Banim. Devarim. Malchim. Ne'arim. Arim. Line 9. Avot, banot, behemot, mishpachot, ne'arot, at. Anashim, line 10. Aratzot, nashim, derachim, avadim, amim. Line 11. Shemarti, shemarta, shemart, shemar, shamra, shamru. Line 12. Ani, ata, at, hu, he, anachnu, atem, hem. As you go over the video and these exercises, one of the things I want to point out is something that's very important in Hebrew. Not as much on this page as on the previous page, but to begin to listen for patterns. And what they've done, and even though you don't know the words, you can hear the patterns. So in this line, for instance, im, 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 im. There's a pattern there. Ot, 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 ot. There's a pattern. Listen for the patterns, because those are going to be important as we get into your nouns and verbs and begin adding pronouns and other elements to those words. So listen for patterns. That's very important in Hebrew. Line 13. Ha'achim me Mitzrayim sham'u ma she'arim hasha'ar. Line 14. Adon, Adonim, Yad, Yadim, Rosh, Roshim, Shem. Do you see the patterns in line 14? Please pay attention. Line 15. Shemot, Ohel, Ohalim, Kohen, Gehonim, Keli, Kelim. Line 16. Midbar, Nefesh, Nefashot, Sar, Sarim, Panim, Od. Line 17. Ko, Zahav, Dam, Damim, Kesef, Olam, Eitz, Eitzim. 18. Matz'u, Katavnu, Petuchot, Kara'u. ta, zak, ra, sha, ma. Now we begin with the first vocabulary of the course. And as I mentioned before, there are about 14 vocab words in every chapter from here on out. And it's very important that you focus on the vocab, even more important than the grammar and the vowels, is to recognize the words themselves. And that only happens with practice. There's a couple of ways to practice that are very important. One is use the link that I've given you and to Quizlet and use the flashcards. And there are also many other tools on Quizlet to help you memorize and remember the words that are up there. But the other way, even if you don't use Quizlet, the other way that is just as valuable is to take each word and write it out and write it across the page 10 times if you can. And as you do that, you are exercising the three different ways of learning. As you are writing it out, you're seeing it. As you are writing it out, you are also doing something physically, kinesthetics. And then as you write the word, as you write this word, you would write it out and say Abraham, Abraham, every single time. So then you're orally learning as well. So just a very good way. And even though I've given you Quizlet with the flashcards, make up your own flashcards. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's another good way to practice, practice, practice. That's how you get to Carnegie Hall, and that's how you get to know your Hebrew. Okay, so let's go through this. Avraham, Abraham. Ish, man. Bayit, house. And as they'll point out below, they're giving you the accent for each of these words in the vocab. They won't be repeating that accent mark in other places, but this is where you would begin to recognize. Normally, a Hebrew word is accented on the last syllable, but when it is not, they will put this mark above the letter to show you that that's the syllable that gets accented. So bayit rather than bayit would be house. Bain for son. Davar, word or thing. David, David. Who, he or it. Zachar, remembered. Malach, ruled or reigned. Melech, king. Na'ar, young man. Amad, stood. Shama, heard or listened. Think of Shema Israel. And Shamar, guarded or kept. Now, as I give you a couple of definitions for a word, it means that there may be circumstances where you use one over the other, or it may just depend on context, but at any rate, know that there are multiple definitions and probably more than the two that they usually give you, where there are a few that might work. And that's the problem with translation, but recognize that. The other thing to point out, again, we talked about patterns. Not only listen for patterns, but look for patterns. What you'll begin to notice is that this is the third person. This is actually he ruled or reigned, but this is a verb pattern. A verb pattern is it begins with a kamatz followed by a patak. So as you see that as opposed to this, then you know that malak is the verb, ruled or reigned. Melech is the noun, king. Both related because it has the same letters, but difference in the vowels. So this is where the vowels do matter. If you're looking to see and trying to decide, is this the subject of the sentence or the verb of the sentence? As you look to the vowels, it will give you that clue. And of course, context also will help you with the clue as well. But be aware of these kinds of patterns. So every verb here, and this is going to be true for most of the early lessons, as they stay in the uh, in the tense, the completed verb tense or past. Uh, this will be the pattern. The book will spend more time talking about that. But again, recognize these patterns as you go. And remember the accent mark, very important. But again, more important is that you remember that this combination of consonants equals young man. This combination of consonants equals he stood, etc. Recognize your consonants and be able to translate them. Even if the vowels change, chances are, if it's this combination of consonants or something very close to it, then that will be the definition that you'll be looking for. So the vowels can change for various reasons, but the consonants would stay pretty much the same. And down here, your note is what I just told you about the accent marks. In these early chapters, the book will be giving you basic grammar information, which most likely most of you know, but just be aware they're just simply telling you what is a sentence. Well, a group of words that expresses a complete thought. And a sentence can be very simple or it can be very complex, but that's true in English and it's true also in Hebrew. So, David Zachar, David remembered. Hu Amad, he stood. And as they point out here, remember Hebrew begins on the right and goes to the left. So Ish Shama, a man heard. Melech Malach, a king ruled. Avraham Shamar, Abraham guarded. Okay? In English, the verb normally follows the subject. It's called SVO, subject, verb, object, is the basic English sentence. In Hebrew, that can be reversed. You can have the verb first and then the subject. So VSO, verb first and then the subject. Either way, it's going to be translated the same. So be aware that, and very often the verb comes first because Hebrew is a verb um, accented language. It's the action in a sentence that's more important in Hebrew in many cases than even the doer of the action. It's the action itself that makes a difference. And that's why your roots, your three letter, your root, triconsonantal root system, which is what Hebrew um, is, is very important to realize that often, even with nouns, the roots themselves were originally or are originally verbs. So that very often you get the verb zakar, remember, but you have different combinations then using these three letters for other words that have to do with remembering. So just be aware again of the pattern. The pattern is recognize your roots and you'll be way ahead of the game in terms of memorizing and learning vocabulary. The roots are very important. At any rate, generally speaking, in the Hebrew sentence, it's going to either be subject verb or verb subject. The object is still going to come in, generally speaking, in the third position after the noun, verb, and or the noun phrase and the verb phrase. But the object will be in the third position as it is in English. But at any rate, so the example they give you, David, Zachar, David remembered, Zachar, David, David remembered, same. So you'll still translate. When you translate in English, you'll switch the order. You'll put the subject first because that's what we do in English. So you wouldn't say remembered David. That makes David the object. It's not, it's the subject. So this is still David remembered, okay? Hu Amad, he stood, or Amad Hu, he stood, same thing, doesn't matter. Verb first, subject first, still going to be the same translation of when you translate it into English of subject verb. But in Hebrew, it can be verb and then subject. Again, very basic grammar. Subject of a sentence is a noun or pronoun, performs the action in the sentence. Who's doing the action? A noun, person, place, object, or idea. A pronoun is a word used in place of a noun. He, she, it, etc. are pronouns. Okay. So again, the nouns in the vocab that we've learned today: Abraham, man, house, son, word or thing, David, king, and young man. All are the nouns from this vocab. Okay, so you'll want to be able to recognize, is it a noun? Is it a verb? And these are the verbs that we have had in this chapter. A verb has, again, very basic grammar. It describes the action going on in the subject. Something is going on. A sentence has to have some kind of action to be an active sentence. I could have the to be verbs and be passive, but basically speaking, it's the action in a sentence that's going to make it interesting and give you the context of what's happening in this in the sentence or the story. So in this chapter, we've had five rather verbs. Remembered, zakar, ruled, malach. Ahmad stood, Shema heard, and Shamar guarded or kept. So Shema and Shamar are only differ by one letter, so be aware of that. Look for that pattern. And Shema, those of you who are Jewish, or those of you who know this, should be a fairly easy one to remember because of the declaration that we say 3 times or more a day. Shema Israel, hear, O Israel. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu. So, hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. So that is the Shema, hear. In this case, it's past tense. Heard, Shema, heard, or guarded or kept. Remember, all of the verbs we're learning now are past tense. They're called completed action for the most part. So it's not only past tense, but just as a general rule to think about. Think about what we're doing now as dealing with past tense verbs. And here your book is going to talk about that. There are only 2 tenses in Hebrew. Perfect tense, which is completed action. That's what we're learning now. And imperfect tense, which is action that is not complete. So it makes it somewhat simple with only 2 tenses. There are more conjugations or more ways to conjugate a verb, more aspects to these two than just the 2. But essentially, you have just the 2 tenses in Hebrew. And all the verbs in this section are in the perfect tense. And this is something else to remember. In English, there are many ways to describe action in the past. In Hebrew, there is only one way. So the Hebrew sentence, David Shamar, can be translated into English as shown below. So this could be translated as David guarded, David did guard, David was guarding, David has guarded, and David had guarded. All of these ways represent a complete action. David did guard already, it's done. David was guarding, but now it's done. David has guarded in the past, but now it's done. And David had guarded. Okay. Important to remember that you can translate in different ways. Generally speaking, just think in terms of simple. Keep it simple. So when we're translating, if you just stay with the basic David guarded, you'll be fine in most cases. If that doesn't work, then think about how else that could be expressed. But again, don't try and memorize all of these aspects of past tense or perfect tense in this case. But look instead to the basics. David guarded, and again, if that doesn't work, then think of another way. As long as you don't make it present tense or future tense, you keep it in the past. It's completed action. Then you'll be fine. I wanted to point this out to you because I think it's very cool, and we'll talk about it more as we get there. So I want to tell you this, and then I want you to forget it. Don't get confused by this. But this is one of the cool things about Hebrew, and this is actually the cover of the book, The Guide to Lashon HaKodesh by Nachman Markusan. I highly recommend getting this book at some point. It is a wonderful book. He's got one that deals specifically with verbs. This one deals with both nouns and verbs. It's a basic grammar book, just like we're doing with First Hebrew Primer. But what I want to point out is just look at the top three. Just look at the top three here. So you begin with your root, and that's important to remember. Always look for and get in the habit. Remember, we talked about patterns. Get in the habit of looking for the root. Once you begin to recognize the root, then the other letters that surround it or come before it or in the middle of it, all of those letters you can kind of pick out and say, all right, that means something, but I know what the root is. The root is guarded, shamar, that's the root. But here's the cool thing about Hebrew. We're dealing with the perfect tense, the completed action. So it's action that has happened in the past. So any additions to this verb in the past, the additions are going to be added to the end because it's the past. It's over. It's at the end. So that's kind of cool to think about because the future tense, these same letters that appear here in various, it could be with different vowels, but essentially the same letters that appear on the end of a past tense verb are going to appear at the beginning because this is the future. It's ahead. It's up ahead. So those letters are going to appear in the beginning of the verb. That's your clue that this verb is future. This verb is past because of where the add-ons appear. And in the present tense, look at this. Present is now, being in the moment. Again, there isn't specifically a present tense, but when we get to the present action of a verb, then you'll find that the add-ons will be in the middle of the word itself, in the moment, in the present. So again, kind of a cool thing about Hebrew to recognize, and in the way it does. But again, you want to be able to recognize shamar is here, shamar is here, shamar is here. So look for your roots, and then look for where that root is being added to or divided. Okay, and that will give you a pretty clear clue as to what's future, what's past, what's present, what's perfect, imperfect, etc. All right, so again, I just think that's cool to recognize. And then these are the other aspects, the other tenses or forms rather of the verbs that you can have. So there are, aside from the basic ones, we have 2, 4, 6 additional ones that we'll be learning, but that won't be in this section of classes. That'll be much further towards the end of the 30 chapters. Okay, so again, the root is key. The root is key. The next thing your book talks about is the pattern for the definite article. Definite article, again, very basic grammar. If a noun is indefinite, it would be a king or a or an, a man or an I. That means any man. Could be any man. Could be any I. Nothing specific. That's an indefinite article. In English, you have to have a or an in front of the noun to indicate whether that's indefinite or not. In Hebrew, there's no indefinite article. If the noun is by itself, it is automatically considered to be indefinite. So this would be a king. Don't translate it as the king because it's not. It's a king. All right? But as in English, if you add the word the in front of the man or the I, then it becomes a particular man, a particular I, a particular king. Not just any old king, but the king. In Hebrew, rather than the word the, you have the article hey, the H sound. And that And this is going to be a pattern you're going to see many, many, many times as you're studying and reading Hebrew. Um, the article hey is going to generally have the patak underneath it. But again, don't get too carried away about this vowel. The vowel can change. The important pattern you're looking for is attached to the beginning of a noun, whatever the noun is, attached at the beginning of it is going to be this hey. And if you see this, that means it's definite. It's not any old king. It's not any old melech. It is the melech. Ha melech. Okay, so right now that there will be something else that'll change this a little bit later on. We'll learn, but for right now, anytime you see that hey in front of a noun, it makes it definite, and you must translate it as that as such. It must be the king. Okay, and any adjectives surrounding that must also be given that same designation, as we'll talk about later. And also, just to point this out again, I say don't focus on this because our focus is not on writing, but on reading. So you won't necessarily have to know this. But when you see something different, Melech here, the mem doesn't have a dot in it. Ha-melech does have a dot or a dagesh in it. Okay, that's another clue. And there's a grammatical reason why it does or why it might not. This vowel might change. It's still that hey is what you're looking for. That's the key, is just the consonant that you're looking for. Doesn't matter what other changes happen here. You don't have to know those because you're not writing it. You're just reading it, and it'll be done correctly, hopefully, when you're reading it. Okay? All right. That's all for that. So here are their examples to show you in a little more detail. So the definite article for thee, you're going to add the hey, the patak, and the dagesh in the next letter. So ha na'ar becomes ha na'ar. Ha davar becomes ha davar, the word. Okay. Ha bain becomes ha bain, the son. Ha bayit becomes ha bayit, the house. Okay. You just add the hey. That's what you're looking for. The hey in front of the word, and it's now a particular noun, not just any old noun. Now, these are the reasons why the vowel could change. One of the reasons the vowel could change underneath the hey. As I've said before, I don't think it's important to stress this too much. You're looking for the hey, not for what the vowel is underneath it, okay? You're looking for the hey. But do be aware that the reason that it changes from the patak is if it's in front of a guttural letter. The aleph, the hey, the chet, the ayin, the resh. If it's under any of those letters, or next to any of those letters, then the vowel could change, and there is no dagesh in the following letter. A guttural can never take a dagesh, or later we'll learn a shavah by itself. Okay, so ish becomes ha-ish, still sounds the same to me. Ear becomes ha-ear. Arim becomes he-arim. All right, the pronunciation is going to be different here. You want to recognize that when you're pronouncing it. But as far as recognizing what it means, it's going to mean the same regardless of what this vowel underneath here is. It's still going to be the cities, the cities, the city, the man. All right. Now, this would be the exception to a noun being definite but not having the hey in front of it. And this is just like English. So, ha'ish zachar, the man remembered. Abraham zachar, Abraham remembered. You don't, if a noun is proper, if it names a particular person, place, or thing, it is not necessary to put the ha in front of it. It's already definite because it's not just any man, it's Abraham, the man. Okay, so, and the same in English. We wouldn't translate this as the Abraham remembered, but we know in English, Abraham is a proper noun. It is a definite noun because it's a proper noun. All right, so same as in English, same as in Hebrew. No hey in front of a proper noun. It's still definite, and it's still, if it had adjectives, would require the hey in front of the adjectives. We'll talk about that later. But again, a proper noun doesn't require the hey to make it definite, but all other nouns do. Okay, so Abraham Zachar, Abraham remembered, or Hamelech Amad, the king stood, or David Amad, David stood. Not the David, but David, because we already know David is a particular person. That's all I got, chapter 4, nouns and verbs, masculine. Now, we will do a separate class for the exercises. In chapter 4, it probably will be a fairly short class, and we may do more exercises than we normally would. just simply because, again, this exercise for chapter 4 is fairly short. They'll get longer as we go, but chapter 5 I think will definitely be worth its own class. Chapter 4 we're kind of stretching it, and we might have been able to add that to this, but I just want to get in the habit here of giving you the information from the chapter first, and then we'll follow that with the exercises. So hopefully you'll have some time to practice the information and to look over the information as often as you can to do that. Remember to purchase your textbook, please. First Hebrew Primer, third edition, to continue the course. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next class. So thanks for joining me on Yeshiva B'nai Noach. I'm Tom Averna. Shalom.